Wonderful. Bueno, voy a empezar con unas palabras en español, diciendo que es una pena no poder estar ahí con ustedes en persona, ni de forma virtual por causas tecnológicas. Sin embargo, creo que, como verán por la temática de mi presentación, mi ausencia en imagen es quizás apropiada. Mi presentación, que como bien dijo la profesora Aguilar será en inglés, girará en torno a una serie de observaciones sobre uno de los paratextos más famosos de Cervantes, su prólogo al lector, parte de las novelas ejemplares. Sin embargo, en honor al aniversario de los 400 años de los trabajos de Persiles y Sigismunda, quisiera empezar con una cita de este texto. Me parece muy apropiada al tema. La historia, la poesía y la cultura simbolizan entre sí y se parecen tanto que cuando escribes historia pintas y cuando pintas compones. No siempre va en un mismo peso la historia, ni la pintura pinta cosas grandes y magníficas, ni la poesía conversa siempre por los cielos. Bajezas admite la historia, la pintura hierbas y retamas en sus cuadros, y la poesía tal vez se realza cantando cosas humildes. While the authorial presence overshadows that of the patron in the dedicatory preface, Cervantes offers readers a new form of counterfeit in the prologue he explicitly addresses to the marketplace. Advancing a bold claim in the preamble to the collection, Cervantes attributes to his person the singular role of being the first writer to create original novelas in Spanish. Yo soy el primero que he novelado en lengua castellana, que las muchas novelas que en ella andan impresas, todas son traducidas de lenguas extranjeras y estas son mías propias, no imitadas ni hurtadas. This statement fabricates value for his works, founded on their linguistic and generic novelty, as well as recognition for his authorial persona, simultaneously setting himself apart from and grouping together translators, imitators, and plagiarizers. It also has the effect of carefully displacing the novela's origins. Cervantes accomplished this in part by mentioning the foreign provenance, while omitting an explicit recognition of the Italian novella tradition that was inaugurated by Boccaccio, Bandello, and Cintio, among others. Furthermore, he disregards all possible Spanish precedents, rooted in the folkloric tradition, as Juan de Timonedas el Patrañuelo, or Juan Manuel el Conde Lucanor. Stepping into the vacant space he has created, Cervantes not too subtly stresses the singularity of his original creation, as he underscores the popularity enjoyed by the novelas in early modern Spain by citing their copious circulation. Leaving aside debates on what this assertion of primacy is somewhat accurate or a willful misrepresentation, as some critics contend, it prompts further scrutiny of what strategy Cervantes employs to construct his self-representation as a writer within a transnational and increasingly commercial literary setting. From this description, we can glean that Cervantes' strategy involves distancing himself from his sources, Italianate or otherwise, and asserting his proprietorship over what he defines as his progeny. More surprisingly, though, he expresses his desire to omit written words altogether, by replacing them with a printed portrait by an artist with a double vocation, that of poet and painter. Quisiera yo, si fuera posible, lector amantísimo, excusarme de escribir este prólogo, porque no me fue tan bien con el que puse en mi Don Quijote, que quedase con ganas de segundar con este, el cual, amigo bien pudiera, como es uso y costumbre, grabarme y esculpirme en la primera hoja de este libro, pues le diera mi retrato, ¿no?, el famoso Juan de Jáuregui, y con esto quedara mi ambición satisfecha y el deseo de algunos que querrían saber qué rostro y talle tiene quien se atreve a salir con tantas invenciones en la plaza del mundo. Usually reserved for the frontispiece or portada, the portrait of the author served as an increasingly popular marketing and self-promotional device for editors and writers. As Leo Braudi observes, with the expansion of the book trade in the 16th century, and especially with the increasing use of copper engravings, previously considered too expensive, after the middle of the century, to supply portraits more detailed than the old wood blocks, printed portraiture becomes a widespread way to merchandise faces other than royal. Cervantes stands in stark contrast to Mateo de Alemán, who published the same engraving in all his works since 1599, and more so with Lope de Vega, a fervent supporter of strengthening the bond between writers and painters, with his adequately prolific more than a dozen portraits. For Cervantes, though, portraiture is not used as a tool to authenticate his works and construct iconographically a social-economic position. Neither does he have the option of artists like Góngora and Quevedo, both caballeros, to be immortalized by the brush of Velázquez through courtly and dignified portraits. Instead, Cervantes remains en blanco y sin figura, frustrating his readers' supposed desire to know the man behind the works, as if playfully mocking the capacity of either text or portrait to capture their subject. To fill out this blank canvas, the paratext of the portrait transposes itself into the realm of the epistolary prologue, while the pictorial is substituted by the literary, resulting in a creatively productive exchange. Making use of what he defines as mi pico tartamudo, his apologetic stammering tongue, the author describes a text that would be placed underneath said likeness, and thus sketches a deliberately ironic and ambiguous verbal self-portrait that has forever given form to his authorial image, contributing to his status in the literary canon as a rare inventor. A los ojos de las gentes poniendo debajo del retrato. Este que veis aquí, de rostro aguileño, de cabello castaño, frente lisa y desembarazada, de alegres ojos y nariz corva, aunque bien proporcionada, las barbas de plata, que no a 20 años fueron de oro, los bigotes grandes, la boca pequeña, los dientes ni menudos ni crecidos, porque no tiene sino 6, y es mal acondicionados y peor puestos, porque no tienen correspondencia los unos con los otros, el cuerpo entre dos extremos, ni grande ni pequeño, la color viva, antes blanca que morena, algo cargado de espaldas y no muy ligero de pies. Este digo que es el rostro del autor. The text's use of expresses seems to foreground the process of artistic creation, reflecting upon the construction of the commercial author, and in some aspects that of commercial portraiture as well, which gained impetus during the 17th century. Cervantes would express more explicitly his stance on the sisterhood between the arts in Part 2 of Don Quixote by stating, "The painter and the writer are one and the same." Debates have been held in an attempt to classify these expresses as notional, based on an imagined work of art, or actual, based on a real one, made possible due to Cervantes' use of the imperfect of the subjunctive. But tabling these speculations, we can focus on its characteristics as an unequivocally narrative ekphrasis that expands beyond the mere description of the object. The text seems to employ techniques that thrive on uncertainty and a succession of paradoxical expressions, exploring the very diffuse limit of words to recover the immediacy of quick brushwork, transposing the complexity of language partially into the realm of the visual. Beginning with the facial features, the depiction follows a downward trajectory that enumerates fragments of the face accompanied by descriptive adjectives. It then transforms into a somewhat less graphic portrayal that digresses into the imaginative realm, sketching for the reader where things might have looked like in the past and what they might not be able to see on a typical portrait. For example, the misalignment of the teeth or the hunched posture. Yet this rather unconventional depiction does associate well with the picaresque-influenced genre paintings artists such as Velázquez experimented on during his early period. For example, The Farmer's Lunch, El Almuerzo de los Campesinos, which combines still life with detailed studies of physiognomy, lifelike movement captured in the gestures and half-open lips of the young man, and a vivid representation of common subjects in stark contrast to the depictions performed of those of noble class. Yet another example that comes to mind is The Water Seller of Seville, a genre scene of a common trade for lower classes in Velázquez Seville, which intermingles elements of portraiture with bodegón paintings, giving prominence to objects like jars, which seem to almost protrude outside of the frame, illustrating with remarkable detail the subject. With his wrinkled brow and weather-worn features, speaking towards his many years of experience. Imperfections are not elided, but captured in detail in a manner similar to what Cervantes does in his self-representation. Much like the Vulcan portrayed by Velázquez in his famous painting, Apollo in the Forge of Vulcan, as Mary Gaylor aptly summarizes in one of her essays, in Cervantes' literary cosmos, the authorial deity is a crippled god, sketched with self-deprecating and yet dignified brushstrokes. The self-portrait is an intriguing vehicle for self-analysis and self-expression, because in it he serves a dual role as both creator and subject, combining visibility with impenetrability, concealing himself behind the canvas of words. According to Pliny the Elder's account, the invention of painting could be said to coincide with that of portraits, the exchange of an absent person with simulacrum, a copy that belongs to an alternate temporality and can recall with memory but is not present in flesh. As the etymology of the Italian ritrato, or Spanish retrato, suggests, with its strong sense of arrest, retreat, as well as return or turn back, it affords a second look, prompting a repetition or doubling. On the other hand, in languages like English, what is emphasized by the prefix derived from pro is substitution, a movement forward, in place of, in front of. However, Cervantes does not allow the image to speak for itself. His words present us with a complex counterfeit that simultaneously calls attention to the similarities and differences and the possibilities and limits of the sister arts. With this verbal portrait, the author explores the divide between what can be said and what can be seen. The effect is an impossible fusion of mediums that brings together a series of dualities, the visual, the verbal, the written, the spoken, and the artist as both object and subject. His self-representation even spills over into the biographical, where the features of the man and his actions and thoughts are all constitutive parts of the portrait. He states, "Fue soldado muchos años, y 5 y medio cautivo, donde aprendió a tener paciencia en las adversidades. Perdió en la batalla naval de Lepanto la mano izquierda de un arcabuzazo," etc. In this manner, Cervantes goes on to fuse not only different media and paratexts, but also physical attributes with autobiographical references that frame his literary and military career. Made up of generalities and particularities, the author highlights certain physiognomic imperfections and details that give illusion of individuality, and then concludes with an abbreviated but unequivocal biographic specifics. As such, the description oscillates between a living face with movement and that of a static picture, transversing from the physical to the autobiographical markers of identity. In this, we might see yet another instance of Italian influence. As Freddy de Grammar contends, Cervantes' impression of art were partially guided by Giorgio Vasari, when his Life of Artists stresses visualization on the part of readers through its varied descriptions of paintings, interweaved with anecdotes and stories taken from the artist's autobiographies, shaping the pictorial elements found in many of Cervantes' works, which, although laden with images, lack illustrations. Vasari's decisions to combine portraits and biography had significant editorial impact, spawning a new narrative mode devoted to the dissemination of the detailed images of modern humanist heroes, as for instance, Francisco Pacheco's Libro de Descripción de Verdaderos Retratos de Ilustres y Memorables Varones. In the end, the reader is left in the in-between, with a pictorial narrative of the author's life and the counterfeit image of his face. In this manner, the portrait seems to draw attention to the ephemeral line that ostensibly divides historical reality from narrative fiction in an attempt to piece together a subject. The result is a dynamic portrait that is shaped by contradictions, and thus, despite the abundance of details, we are left with a pattern of imagery that is ambivalent and elusive to our grasp. This strategy of self-representation gives shape to a complex chain of potential metonymic substitutions that question the value of both literary and visual representations, resulting in a double vision that seeks new conciliatory spaces of exchange between the disciplines, while simultaneously problematizing the authority of the textual and pictorial to enact the presence of the authorial figure. If the use of portraits in books functions as a device that was intended to prove the authenticity of the printed text and increase the author's recognizability with his audience, we can say that portraiture offers paradoxically both permanence with absence and authenticity with reproducibility. In the opposition between self-effacement, resulting in privacy and self-possession, versus the self-perpetual and fetishizing afforded by becoming an inanimate, commodified object and showing himself publicly as part of a commercial strategy, Cervantes seems to opt for the former. At odds with many of his contemporaries and the traffic of artist self-portraits, Cervantes reveals his true semblance, as the testament of his time corroborates, the allure of what remains unseen. Thank you.